The gold leaf ceiling of the Grand Imperial Hotel was so vast it felt like it was pressing down on me. The opulence of the lobby making me feel smaller with every step. My fingers ached as I gripped the edges of my portfolio case, the leather biting into my skin, a grounded physical pain I welcomed to keep the rising panic at bay. I had spent 3 years building my reputation as a designer, always working from the safety of my home office, always hidden behind a screen. Today, a direct request from a major stakeholder had pulled me into the one place I had spent 6 months avoiding, the public eye. Of course, the universe had a cruel sense of humor. The side entrance I had planned to use was cordoned off for maintenance, forcing me through the main lobby. The space stretched before me like a velvet-lined trap, filled with the scent of expensive sandalwood and fresh lilies that felt suffocating. My heels clicked too loudly on the polished marble, a rhythmic countdown marking me as an interloper in a world of old money. I kept my chin up, eyes fixed on the silver doors at the end of the hall. 30 steps to the elevator. 30 steps until I could reach the boardroom, secure the family estate, and disappear back into my quiet, anonymous life. 30 steps. I could survive 30 steps. Olivia! The name didn't just stop me. It felt like a physical blow to my spine. My stomach turned. That familiar, privileged drawl, the voice that had spent years convincing me I was nothing without him, turned my blood to slush. I didn't turn around. I prayed the shadows of the massive columns would swallow me. Maybe if I just kept walking, the nightmare wouldn't be real. Olivia, stop. I know it's you. The footsteps behind me were heavy, possessive. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I clutched my portfolio to my chest and quickened my pace. 15 steps. Just 15 more. Don't you dare walk away from me. A hand clamped onto my upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscle with enough force to spin me around. Mark looked exactly as he had the night I left, impeccably groomed, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, with eyes that looked like blue glass, beautiful but incapable of warmth. He smelled of high-end gin and the arrogance that came with a trust fund. I have a meeting, Mark, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. Please take your hand off me. A meeting. He let out a sharp, mocking bark of a laugh. Is that what we're calling it now? You disappear for 6 months, block my calls, hide like a coward, and now you're here acting like a professional. I explained everything in the legal notice, Mark. We are finished. I tried to pull back, but his grip only tightened, pulling me closer into his space. Finished. He spat the word as if it were poison. We aren't finished until I say we are. You think you can just walk away from me and buy back that pathetic little estate? You belong with me, Olivia. I looked at the silver doors just behind him. They were beginning to slide open, a soft chime echoing through the lobby. It was my only exit, my only sanctuary. I didn't think, I just reacted. I twisted my arm with everything I had, breaking his hold, and lunged toward the closing silver gap. I didn't look at who was already inside. I only saw the safety of the silver cage. I threw myself through the doors just as they began to hiss shut, slamming into a chest that felt less like a man and more like a wall of solid iron. I looked up, the apology dying in my throat. I hadn't just run into an elevator. I had run into the arms of CO June, and as the doors clicked shut, locking out Mark's screams, I realized the silent, brooding man holding me didn't look like he intended to let go. The velvet trap had finally snapped shut. Mark's fingers were like iron bands around my bicep, his face reddening with a familiar toxic mix of ownership and rage. In the high-ceilinged expanse of the Grand Imperial lobby, surrounded by the scent of lilies and the judgment of the wealthy, I felt like a bird pinned to a board. You think this is over, Olivia? Mark hissed, his breath hot against my ear. You think you can just hide in the shadows and buy your way out of my life? You're coming with me. Now. He began to pull, his strength fueled by the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. My heels skidded on the polished marble. Desperation, cold and sharp, overrode the paralysis of my fear. I saw the silver doors of the elevator bank at the end of the hall, The only exit that didn't lead back to the street where his car and his men were waiting. With a jagged, guttural cry, I threw the entire weight of my body into a sharp twist. The surprise of my resistance loosened his grip for a heartbeat. I didn't breathe. I didn't think so. Ran. My portfolio case flapped against my leg as I lunged toward the silver gap. I could hear Mark's roar behind me, the heavy thud of his loafers as he gave chase. The elevator doors began to hiss shut, a slow, mechanical execution of my last hope. I didn't slow down. Dove. My shoulder grazed the closing metal, and for a terrifying second, I thought I wouldn't make it. Then I was through. The doors clicked shut behind me, severing the sound of Mark's screaming voice, leaving only the sound of my own frantic, sobbing gasps. But I hadn't landed on the floor. I had slammed into a wall of solid, unyielding heat. The impact knocked the remaining air from my lungs. My hands, still trembling, reached out to steady myself, catching the fabric of a suit that felt like woven silk over granite. I looked up, my eyes wide and stinging with tears, and found myself staring into a face that belonged on an ancient coin. Seo Jun was leaning casually against the back wall of the elevator. His arms crossed over a chest that felt like armor. He didn't move to catch me, nor did he push me away. He simply watched me with a gaze so sharp and clinical it felt like a physical weight. He was the king of soul, the silent owner of the very air I was breathing, and I had just crashed into him like a broken bird. "Apologies," I choked out, my voice a ragged whisper. I didn't see you." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The elevator suddenly groaned, a deep, metallic protest that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. Before I could regain my balance, the car lurched violently upward, then snapped to a dead halt. The force sent me stumbling back against the opposite wall. The bright, golden overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a low, crimson glow hummed to life as the emergency system kicked in, bathing the small silver square in the color of a warning. We were suspended in the dark, caught between the world I was fleeing and a world I didn't yet understand. "It seems," Seo Jun said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that felt like it was vibrating through the walls themselves, "that you've traded one trap for another." I slid down the wall until my knees hit the carpet, the adrenaline finally leaving me and leaving only a hollow, shaking exhaustion in its wake. I could hear Mark on the other side of the doors, not here but somewhere below or above us. His muffled rages vibrating through the shaft. He was still there. He was always there. Seo Jun didn't sit. He remained standing, a silhouette of predatory grace in the dim red light. He unbuttoned his blazer, the movement slow and deliberate, revealing the dark line of his silk vest and the hint of the ink that climbed his neck. "Why are you running, Olivia?" The sound of my name in his mouth felt like a claim. I looked up at him, my breath hitching. "You know who I am." "I know everyone who enters my house," he replied. He stepped forward, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached down, his fingers catching my chin and tilting my face up toward the red light. His touch wasn't cruel like Mark's, but it was infinitely more powerful. He traced the faint, darkening bruise on my wrist, the one Mark had left when he grabbed me. "Is this why?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "A man who thinks he can own a spirit like yours with a grip on the arm. It's inefficient. It's small." "He won't stop," I whispered, the honesty pulled out of me by the terrifying intimacy of the dark. "He thinks he can buy my history. He thinks he can buy me back." Seo Jun's thumb grazed my jawline, a gesture that was almost a caress and entirely an inspection. "He thinks he can buy you because you've allowed yourself to be seen as a prize to be won. But in this room there is no money. There is only the dark, and there is me." He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing mine. I could see the clinical interest in his eyes. He wasn't looking for a woman to save. He was looking at a person to acquire. He was a man who made problems disappear, but I knew even then, that the price for his protection would be something far more permanent than a business deal. "The power will return in 10 minutes, Seo Jun said, his voice a whisper against my forehead. "When those doors open, your past will be waiting on the other side. You can walk out and let him take you, or you can stay behind me. But if you stay, Olivia, you stop being his. You become mine." I looked into the deadly calm of his gaze and felt a terrifying, dangerous comfort. The whispers in the dark were louder than the screams outside. For the first time in 6 months, I stopped shaking. I didn't want to be a survivor anymore. I wanted to be a ghost. The crimson emergency light pulsed with the slow, rhythmic throb of a heartbeat, casting long, predatory shadows across the silver walls of the elevator. Seo Jun didn't move, yet his presence seemed to expand, filling the small space until the air felt pressurized. He reached out again, his large hand closing around my forearm with a grip that was neither gentle nor aggressive. It was absolute. He pulled my arm into the direct path of the red light, his thumb grazing the jagged, blooming bruises Mark had left behind. "This," he said, his voice dropping into a register that made the soles of my feet tingle. "This is the signature of a weak man trying to feel strong. It's a messy, loud way to exert control." He looked up from my wrist, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine with a clinical intensity that felt like it was stripping away my skin. "A man is standing outside these doors, Olivia. He's making a scene in my lobby. He's shouting a name that he thinks he owns. Tell me, does he have a reason to believe he has a claim on you?" I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. The muffled sounds of Mark's distant, frantic pounding on the steel doors above us filtered through the shaft, a reminder of the storm waiting to break. "He thinks he does," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He thinks everything has a price tag, and because he paid for my time once, he owns the deed to my life. He's not just a problem, Mr. Seo. He's a parasite." Seo Jun's gaze didn't waver. He appraised me not as a victim, but as a piece of high-stakes collateral. He saw the terror, yes, but he also saw the way I was clutching my portfolio, the way I had fought back in the lobby. "A parasite only survives if the host allows it," he remarked, finally releasing my arm. He leaned back against the railing, the silk of his vest shimmering in the dim red glow. "You didn't run into this elevator just to hide. You were coming to this hotel for a reason. You were carrying that case like it was a shield. What is it you're so afraid of losing that you'd walk through a gauntlet of ghosts to protect it?" The question hit me harder than the collision had. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a raw, aching honesty that only the dark can produce. I looked down at my scuffed heels, the reality of my situation crashing down. "It's not just a portfolio," I said, my voice gaining a jagged edge of defiance. "It's my family's legacy. My grandfather built an estate on the outskirts of the city, a place that was supposed to stay in our name forever. But when he died, the debts and the lawyers tore it apart. Mark's family bought the debt. They've been holding the deed over my head like a leash for years." I looked up at him, my eyes stinging. "I've spent every waking hour of the last 6 months freelancing, designing, and scraping together every cent. I'm here today to meet with the primary stakeholder to buy back the first block of that land. If I don't make this meeting, if Mark catches me and drags me back into his orbit, I lose the house. I lost the only thing that proves my family ever existed." For the first time, I saw something shift in Seo Jun's expression. It wasn't a pity. Men like him didn't deal in such cheap currency. It was a flicker of recognition, a stoic respect for a fellow predator who understood the weight of an empire, even a small one. He understood the drive to reclaim what the world had stolen. "Legacy," he mused, the word sounding like a prayer in his deep rumble. "A dangerous motivation. It makes people do brave things, and it makes them do very stupid things." He stepped back into my personal space, his silhouette blotting out the red light. "You want your home back. You want your name back. But you are fighting a war with a pen while your enemy is using a sledgehammer. You are trying to buy your freedom from a man who doesn't want your money. He wants your submission." The elevator hummed, a low vibration indicating the secondary systems were trying to kick in. Seo Jun reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a heavy, matte black card. It had no name, no numbers, only a small, embossed dragon coiled around a silver key. He held it out between two fingers, a silent covenant offered in the belly of a dead machine. "In my world," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a secret whispered in a confessional, "power is the only currency that doesn't devalue. Mark is a nuisance because he believes he is the apex. He believes this because he has never met the man who owns the ground he stands on." He pressed the card into my palm, his fingers lingering against mine. The card was cold, heavy, and felt like a weapon. "This is not a gift, Olivia. It is a shield. As long as you carry this, you are no longer a freelance designer fleeing a mistake. You are an extension of my interest. If he touches you, he touches me. If he speaks to you, he answers to me." He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath warm and smelling of expensive sandalwood. "But understand the fine print of the Devil's Covenant. My protection is absolute, but it is not quiet. By taking this, you are stepping out of the shadows and into my light. You will buy your house, and you will secure your legacy, but you will do it as mine." I looked at the black card, then up at the man who looked like he could dismantle the world with a single phone call. The muffled rages of Mark felt smaller now, like the buzzing of a fly against a windowpane. I realized I wasn't choosing between safety and danger. I was choosing which master I wanted to serve. And looking into Seo Jun's deadly calm eyes, I knew I would rather be the obsession of a king than the plaything of a coward. "I understand," I whispered, my fingers tightening around the card until the edges bit into my skin. "Good," Seo Jun replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The power is returning. Adjust your hair, Olivia. The king is about to show your past why it should have stayed buried." A sharp chime echoed through the car as the bright golden overhead lights slammed back to life, blinding us for a heartbeat. The elevator lurched, finally moving upward toward the lobby where the world was waiting to see who would walk out of the silver doors. The golden light of the elevator didn't just return. It surged back with a violent, electric hunger, reclaiming the cramped silver square with a brilliance that felt less like illumination and more like a searing accusation. After the long minutes of crimson-soaked shadows and whispered secrets, the sudden artificial glare made the world feel painfully real again. I squinted, the spots dancing in my vision, while my fingers remained white-knuckled around the matte black card Seo Jun had pressed into my palm. It was cold, heavier than any piece of plastic had a right to be, and it felt like a lead weight anchoring me to a new and terrifying reality. The mechanical hum of the elevator car resuming its ascent was a low, predatory purr that vibrated through the soles of my feet. It was the sound of a beast waking up. Beside me, Seo Jun didn't flinch at the light. He simply adjusted the cuff of his silk shirt, the movement fluid and terrifyingly calm. He was no longer the man who had shared the intimate silence of the dark with me. He was once again the king of soul, the architect of a world where mercy was a forgotten language. He reached into his tailored vest and pulled out a sleek, encrypted phone. The device looked like a shard of obsidian in his hand. He didn't look at me as he dialed. His gaze was fixed on the digital floor indicator as it flickered from 12 to 14, then 15. The numbers changed with a rhythmic finality. When he finally spoke, his voice was a deadly calm rasp, the sound of a tempered blade being drawn slowly from a silk sheath, beautiful but lethal. "It's me," he said. The words didn't just fill the elevator. They seemed to vibrate the very air in my lungs. "There is a fly in my lobby. A nuisance named Mark. He is harassing a guest of mine. No, don't remove him yet. I want him to see. I want him to understand exactly what he is losing." He paused, a ghost of a predatory smile touching his lips. It was a look that made my blood turn to ice. "Then call his father," Seo Jun continued, his tone conversational, as if he were ordering a drink rather than ending a dynasty. Tell the elder Mr. Sterling that his son's line of credit with the world has just been closed. By the time I reach the ground floor, I want his family's holding company to be a memory. Everything. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the political favors. Burn it all. And the estate he's holding as a leash. Secure the deed immediately. It belongs to the girl now. It was never his to begin with. He ended the call with a clinical metallic click. The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness had ever been. He didn't ask for my permission. He didn't seek my approval or check to see if I was comfortable with the carnage he had just unleashed. In the span of 30 seconds, he had dismantled a multi-million-dollar empire and reclaimed my family's history with the casual ease of a man swatting a mosquito. I looked at him, my breath hitching in a throat that felt constricted by invisible wires. I realized then that while Mark had used the leash of debt and fear to keep me close, Co. June used a scorched earth policy. He didn't play games of pursuit. He simply removed the ground from beneath his enemy's feet. The trajectory of Mark's life hadn't just been altered, it had been deleted. Every privilege, every bit of power he had used to torment me, was being evaporated by a few words from a man who considered a hotel lobby his private throne room. As the elevator slowed, the sensation of gravity shifting felt like the world itself was resetting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythmic drumming that seemed to echo the ticking of a clock I couldn't see. I expected chaos on the other side of those doors. I expected the sound of Mark's screaming rage, the frantic energy of a public scene, and the desperate shouting of a man losing his grip. I braced myself for the impact of his voice, for the way he would lunge at me. But when the silver doors finally hissed open, the silence that greeted us was far more terrifying than any scream could ever be. The Grand Imperial lobby, which only an hour ago had been a bustling gauntlet of the city's elite, had been transformed into a theater of cold intimidation. The air felt static, charged with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. The soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, which usually signaled luxury, now felt like the vaulted roof of an arena. The space was eerie in its stillness, the usual chime of voices and clinking of glasses replaced by a hollow, expectant vacuum. Mark was there. He was standing exactly where I had left him, near the center fountain, but the man I saw now was a ghost of the creature who had grabbed me. He was surrounded. A phalanx of 12 men in identical charcoal gray suits formed a perfect, impenetrable circle around him. Their hands were clasped in front of them, their expressions as stoic and unmoving as the obsidian statues that guarded the hotel's corners. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They simply existed as a human wall, pinning Mark into a small, suffocating square of polished marble. Mark's face, which had been flushed with the red heat of arrogance and ownership, was now a sickly, translucent white. He looked smaller, his expensive suit suddenly appearing 2 sizes too large for his trembling frame. He was staring down at his phone, his hands shaking so violently that the device rattled against his wedding ring, the ring he still wore as a claim on a life I had already left. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth like a trapped animal realizing the cage was shrinking. He looked up as Co. June stepped out of the elevator. Co. June didn't hesitate. He walked with a deliberate, slow-burn confidence that commanded every eye in the room. He didn't just walk. He took possession of the floor. As we approached the circle, Co. June's arm crossed in front of my chest, a protective barrier that felt less like a hug and more like a flag planted in new territory. It was a claim of ownership that the entire room could read. Mark tried to speak. His jaw worked, his lips parting to let out one of his practiced, biting insults, but the words died in his throat. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated the moment Co. June's gaze fell upon him. It wasn't the look of a rival or an angry boyfriend. It was the look of a god observing a particularly dull ant beneath a magnifying glass. It was a look of profound, chilling indifference. "Your phone is ringing, Mark," Co. June said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silent lobby like a thunderclap, echoing off the marble walls. Mark looked down at the screen in his hand. It was glowing. It's your father, Seo Jun continued, his voice dropping into that melodic, dangerous rumble. He's calling to tell you that as of 30 seconds ago, you no longer have a name, a bank account, or a reason to stay in my city. The sterling name is dead. You have 5 minutes to leave this hotel and find a hole to crawl into. If I ever see your shadow near this woman again, or if you even whisper her name in your sleep, you won't be leaving the next room you enter. Do you understand the finality of my words? The suited men parted with a terrifying, synchronized grace, creating a narrow path to the revolving doors. It was a corridor of shame. Mark didn't argue. He didn't try to lung at me or shout one last lie. He looked at me for a split second, and for the first time I didn't see a predator. I saw a terrified boy who realized he had tried to bully a queen protected by a king. He stumbled toward the exit, his world having collapsed in the time it took for an elevator to travel 12 floors. He was a man without a country, cast out into the afternoon sun to face a life of nothingness. I stood there, the weight of the matte black card in my pocket feeling like an anchor. I looked at the King of Seoul, who was now gesturing with a slight tilt of his head for a private security detail to step forward. They moved with the same silent efficiency as the rest of his world. These men will escort you to your meeting, Seo Jun said, turning to me. The lethal edge in his voice softened just a fraction, but the intensity remained. The stakeholder is waiting. He knows the deed is being transferred. Your family's legacy is secure, Olivia. Go and take what is yours. He hadn't just saved me from a bad situation. He had colonized my future. He had rewritten the rules of my life while I was still trying to catch my breath. As I walked toward the exit later that afternoon, the meeting having gone exactly as he dictated, I felt the cool air of the city hit my face. It was the same Seoul, the same sounds of traffic and distant sirens, but everything looked different. The deed to my family estate was already being processed into my name, a digital ghost of my grandfather's dream finally coming home. I felt the weight of it in my bag, a heavy, beautiful burden. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk and looked back at the Grand Imperial. I looked at the soaring glass and stone, the velvet silence behind the doors, and the way the building seemed to watch the city. I had spent 6 months fleeing a man who treated me like a possession, a trophy to be displayed and broken at will. I had run from the small monster, only to run headlong into the arms of a man who treated me like a kingdom. Mark was a monster, I knew. He was a petty, predictable cruelty that I could eventually navigate. But Seo Jun, he was a different reality entirely. He was a force of nature dressed in a 3-piece suit. He was more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined, a dark protector who had traded my freedom for my survival. He hadn't just removed my enemy. He had replaced him with a version of protection that left no room for my own agency. As the black sedan Seo Jun had pulled up to the curb, the driver stepped out to open the door with a silent bow. I realized I wasn't looking over my shoulder for Mark anymore. The fear of that sandy-haired boy was gone, vanished as if he had never existed. Instead, I was looking into the reflection of the tinted windows, staring at my own wavering image. I found myself wondering when the king would come to collect on the covenant we had made in the dark of that elevator. I had taken his card. I had accepted his scorched earth rescue. I had allowed him to burn down a family to save my house. I was safe, yes. The predator was gone. But as the car pulled away and the Grand Imperial faded into the distance, I knew I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the girl running through the lobby. I was something else now. I was a part of his world, a piece on his board. I was safe, but I was no longer free. I was his.